Wave. You have to. Nostalgia is big right now, whether it's the return of the Ugg boot, the Nokia brick phone, or me looking through my Tumblr from 2016. Everyone is talking about yesteryear, including brands like Kellogg's, Hellmann's, and McDonald's. It's quite a complex emotion, one that can probably be best conveyed via its etymology. In ancient Greek, it stands for to return home and also pain. Fast forward to the 18th century, and its German roots landed on acute homesickness. So I am joined by Chris Beer and Matt Smith, our data journalists, to talk through the numbers behind nostalgia. Guys, let's kick things off by talking about what you're most nostalgic for.
You want to go first, Matt?
Yeah. So I think that, media is an obvious one. I think that you think about the films that you watched when you were growing up, old TV shows, music, those kind of things that like evoke emotion or make you want to kind of go back to that time.
Yeah, I was thinking about this quite a lot. I think media is one. I think a lot of mine are very consumerist in a weird way. I didn't even realize that. I was listing things like Pokémon cards, Sunny Delight, orange drink, which if I saw that on the shelves, I think I'd be thrown back.
Yeah.
And Haagen-Dazs ice cream, I think.
Really?
Yeah, which you can still get, but I think my family happened to get it, then they didn't. So yeah, I tend to think it in a more buying context, which
really
shows how you can activate it in the right places, I think.
You can't get Sunny D with the E numbers anymore,
No. Certainly not. They'll have to reformulate it, I think.
Bring back the good old days. So I think we all kind of know what nostalgia feels like. It's a pretty universal emotion. Chris, give us the background on nostalgia.
You mentioned about the etymology there, which gives you some clues into its history. But it's very, very interesting because when it was first written about, it was in the context of being a disease, an affliction that people would look to get cures for.
Interesting.
So it's first documented, I think, with soldiers who were serving abroad, Swiss mercenaries, and also first-year university students, which touched something I think we're going to mention later, is that I think you might assume that nostalgia comes more as you get older, you have more life experience, but actually young people are often the most nostalgic. And I think some of the first documented cases, like Highland soldiers, they were banned from playing their own music from home because it would make them nostalgic. They can no longer fight. So it becomes a medical issue. And I do find that quite interesting in terms of the history. I think we now associate with more positive things. I think when we gave our definitions there, that's how we like to think about it. But it started in a much more negative or medicinal context. It'd be like if our descendants were recording a podcast 300 years from now and we talk about, how can marketers make people really anxious? And that became much more positively coded. It's had a similar journey.
Yeah. That's so interesting that it was viewed as like a bad thing. Like now it feels like a bit of a bruise that you prod. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like the longing. It's like not necessarily a bad thing. We all feel it and we all kind of get nostalgic for various things. So what really interests me is the idea that young people are more nostalgic than the average person. So if I think back to what I was most nostalgic for back in the day when I was like 10, it was watching season 1 of Friends on VCR. So I was born in 95 and I had 5 years of the 90s, much of which I don't remember because I was a baby. And I distinctly remember like my comfort thing would be to reminisce watching season 1 of Friends, like maybe going on Club Penguin, eventually going on Tumblr, all these things that like, how could I have been nostalgic for something that I didn't even experience? Like there I am being like, oh God, bring back the 90s. But I wasn't someone who was around to enjoy the 90s in any kind of serious form. So, what are people looking back on exactly? Matt, maybe you want to take this one. Kind of, what is this kind of divide between missing what you don't remember and what you didn't actually experience?
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of proxies in our research for nostalgia. It's a tricky thing to ask outright because it's not necessarily a term that translates across markets, or it's kind of difficult to articulate. It's culturally fluid. So we kind of get around that by saying, do you prefer thinking about the past rather than the future? And in the UK, at least, it kind of follows it's like an inverse bell curve. It's like a U. So, young people and old people are the ones that are most likely to say so. And what's interesting about that is like you say, being nostalgic for a time that you weren't even living for.
Yeah.
You have to think about during the 2010s how big 80s nostalgia was, and even amongst young people, they were loving Stranger Things.
Oh my God, yeah. And the Kate Bush song, everyone was like, oh my God, this just reminds me of the past. Like, you weren't born.
For real.
I think to your point as well, it's like you didn't live through the 90s, but it also means you didn't live through the bad bits, right? So it's easy to have rose-tinted glasses as something you didn't experience the negatives of.
Yeah.
You have to think about like when looking back, the stuff that survived in pop culture was most likely the most like visceral and the good stuff, if that makes sense. It's like we talk about today about how maybe kids' movies aren't as good as they were when we were growing up, but there was some bad stuff released in our childhood, and I went to see it. You know what I mean? I saw Cat in the Hat in cinemas. It's not good.
Well, also like Bridge to Terabithia. Do you guys remember that movie?
I don't remember that.
I've never heard of it.
Oh my God, it was this movie that was literally the most like gut-wrenching, traumatizing thing, and everyone went to watch it, and everyone came out like absolutely scarred because it was so traumatic. So yeah, okay, movies weren't as good, but they were also like horrific. I'm still scarred. You have to watch it. So do we know why nostalgia takes hold? You were saying it's like a kind of
young and old. Yeah.
Young and old. Like, why are young and old people nostalgic? What's the science behind that?
So I think, well, I suppose if you're older, it makes sense. You've got more life experiences to reflect on. I think one of the theories I've seen float with younger people is it's not actually necessarily related to age, but the level of disruption that you go through, which I think
your life.
Yeah.
At that stage.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes sense to me intuitively. It's, as a young person, you go from, you'll be in school, but then you finish school and you might have sort of post-16 education, then university, first job. Like there's a lot of firsts, right? First relationships, all these other things. And that succession of change means you have a tendency to look back to the previous one. And there's certain theories around nostalgia that it helps us prepare for the future by giving us something to anchor on. It gives us that sense of continuity. That's part of the reason we have this emotion. So that might be part of the reason at work for young people. But I mean, Matt, this is something you've been looking into recently. I think it's safe to say among a young audience now, there's a certain year that nostalgia force seems to be present in TikToks with millions of likes, I want to say. Very, very visible.
Yeah, for sure. Like a bit of a trend I've noticed online is specifically around the year 2016, which, at time of recording, if you're coming back years later, is not even 10 years ago at this point. It's kind of like, how can you be nostalgic for a time that's so present feeling, but there's a lot of kind of Zoomers online who are, lamenting about it, saying it was the last good year and, it was all downhill from here. Remember the summer of 2016? And when you look back, they're talking about things like, Pokemon Go and then Pokemon Go to the polls beyond that, but we'll get to the politics.
Was Pokemon Go 2016?
Yeah, summer 2016.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? At one point, there were more people using Pokemon Go than like Amazon, I think. At least
among Gen Zers.
Gen Z. Yeah. At that brief peak in like 2016.
Was 2016 the year that we had the football? Wasn't there a big football thing?
Well,
wasn't there a big tournament or something?
I mean, this is what I find so interesting because, I think you guys have the same memories. Maybe not, we can get into that, but as someone who's there at the time, as everyone over the age of 10 was, but I remembered like the whole time was 2016 was seen as a very, very bad year because it had all these things going on. There was a lot of celebrity deaths, like starting with David Bowie in January and then everyone else following. There was, what you're referring to is England lost very embarrassing against Iceland.
That's what I'm referring to.
There was also UK leaving the European Union, Brexit vote, Trump, which,
Gosh, was that all in the same year?
Exactly, all in the same year. So the memes at the time, as I remember them, Matt, we probably can't use the uncensored version of it, but they express a certain discontent with the year at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
But 9 years later, suddenly it's a lot more of a positive association.
I think it speaks to that kind of idea of like rose-tinted glasses. And I think for a lot of younger consumers as well, this was kind of the last year without maybe real world responsibilities, and the last year before kind of things got real, politically and socially and everything there, they were insulated potentially due to their age from the kind of fallout of 2007, 2008, but they've lived through Trump, Brexit, COVID, so for them that was the last year that they kind of didn't have to think about any of those things.
Well, okay, so if I'm remembering correctly, 2016 was the year that I graduated uni and moved to London, I think. Yeah. Am Must have been. Do you know? I'm looking to you as if we went to uni.
Well, I contacted the alumni office
thank
and
you.
they didn't know either.
Okay. But so that was, going back to what you were saying, like up until that point, I had structure for every year that would follow my life, right? And then 2016 came around and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life now? Like, I actually have to decide. There's no first year, second year, third year. There's no like school, then uni, then this. Like, it was just like, oh, bleep, now I have to find a job and like go out into the world and be a real human. And so because I didn't have those kind of bookmarks of this is next and this is next, I was now on my own path. So naturally I was looking back with rose-tinted glasses, as you say, thinking back to, you know, all the times when my life was laid out for me, you know? And you mentioned rose-tinted glasses. So like, I think one of the things, this is going to be a bit poetic accidentally, but anytime you look back on history, it's kind of like, I'd relate it to looking at photographs, right? The negatives don't print.
Yes.
So you do not carry that sense of turmoil that you did. You always just look back on it with rose-tinted glasses. You forget the negatives, you know? And all the negatives that you mentioned or that you kind of experience with that sense of lostness that you know, moving forward. I look back on that summer and I'm like, what a time, you know?
I think, yeah, to your point, Matt, I mean, there was an interesting thing I think we found in the data, wasn't there? It's like, it's a bit of a transition year and people going from, what is it? It's more PCs to more phones. You think maybe that's associated with it, some sort of lingering memory of like, before, I don't know, everyone was just on the phones all the time. I don't know if that really comes forward in the memes, but maybe something there.
I think it felt like we've seen a lot of trends around how and why people are using social media, and it was kind of a transitional period whereby stuff like, you know, using social to see what's trending or you know, looking at memes and things like that was starting to really bubble up, but it was still primarily a means of just keeping in touch with your friends and family, you know. So maybe the era of the terminally online wasn't as you know, it wasn't as big. It
wasn't quite terminal yet.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something you mentioned before we started talking about the fading effect, because we did some questions, didn't we, around how people felt about lockdown.
Yes.
Talk us through that.
Yeah. So for context, the fading effect bias, I think it's called, is exactly what you're describing. This idea that we forget negative memories a lot more quickly than we forget positive ones, which I think probably makes sense in an evolutionary perspective. Like, if we all forgot the positive things quite quickly, I'm not sure any of us would cope with that for very long.
It's a kind of like Freudian suppression.
Yeah. If you want to dig into that deeply, I suppose it is. But yeah, we did. We experimented with a survey. This is, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where we asked the UK population how they felt about lockdown, that kind of situation. It was striking that it was a real 50-50 split at the time as to how much people enjoyed it versus they didn't. So a lot of people valued time spent with family, and perhaps a sense that life was more simple, which I think ties in exactly what you're describing, the sense of, you know, life was a lot clearer, right? In the sense of more restricted, but it's a bit more simple and it's a bit more structured. And I think it's just, for me, it's what I find so fascinating about the 2016 thing. And I think we're starting to see it with 2020, and it'll come up a bit more in the next few years, is that nostalgia is just inevitable. Like, it doesn't matter how bad a year is at the time. Like, you can bank in 10-15 years it will be looked back on with rose-tinted glasses. I think for us, that's what makes it so fascinating, because as a trend or a piece of consumer psychology, it's almost inevitable. Like, it's just because of these effects that are in play, like, you can't really stop it from happening.
Yeah. One of the things I like to do if I'm going through a tough time is say to myself, what would make me nostalgic for this moment? So but it genuinely works. Like, if I'm like, oh, you know, this is really stressful, or I've got this going on in my life, I think, okay, but zooming out, what would I look back on this year or this month and think, oh, that was so cool, I got to do that, or I wish I had that time to do this thing. We talked a little bit about young people and old people being the most nostalgic. Do you guys think that it's kind of a consistent thing just running in the background, Matt? I mean, do you think it increases or decreases at certain points?
I think if we can learn anything from COVID, is that it kind of tends to spike during moments of crisis. Yeah. So there's
Which
a great...
is so fascinating.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. Like there's a great paper that shows how more people listen to kind of nostalgic music as soon as lockdown was introduced in the UK. I think as well, I mean, you mentioned Pokemon cards, like 2020 represented when they suddenly became like a hot investment, you know, and everyone was kind of, they during this time of crisis, they were kind of using consumerism as a bit of escapism as well. it's not a new thing really either. During the Great Depression, the 1930s, that represented a kind of boom for Hollywood, like a golden age, because what little money people had, they were using it to escape and go to the cinema and forget about their problems for a little bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The music thing is really interesting. So there's a playlist, you guys may have heard it, that I put on every Wednesday, which is a Spotify radio based on Emma Bunton's What Took You So Long.
I'm familiar, yeah.
You're familiar because I play it every Wednesday. And it's funny because like us millennials, I think I'm a bit of a zillennial. Just I say that just so I can
Borderline.
I can stay relevant with the kids. But like Raj, who's Gen X,
yeah, it must be.
he hates it. He hates it. He doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't like that playlist. And I think it's because he's not as nostalgic as we are, because he probably went through that time in his life where that was on the radio all the time. Whereas it's less of a memory to me.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear that song, I can taste Sunny Delight. Like I'm throwing back to it straight away.
That's what I mean. I'm so glad that's the vibe I bring to the office.
I
Pure play nostalgia.
I think to your question though, it's interesting because you mentioned this before with the Kate Bush song. Is that I think, yeah, nostalgia has these peaks and moments of crisis. It's always consistent because it just seems to be this behavioral pattern that we all have. But I do think it's something with media where the last 20 years, because we don't have that monoculture anymore, where we're all.
What do you mean by monoculture?
So this idea that like for a long time, essentially, a very crude summary, like people are watching, consuming the same things, whereas now we're in much more individual bubbles of like what you watch on Netflix.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
what I watch on Netflix or other streaming services.
Yeah.
Matt will be watching on Apple TV, YouTube, or something else. And because we all have access to these huge content archives of content from any time, right? So when you go and watch TV tonight, like you could watch anything, right? You could dip back into Mad Men, like a series that's even older.
Yeah.
So everything's competing with everything in history. And I think it's so much easier to tap into that nostalgic impulse because it's just so much more available now.
Yeah.
And we mentioned before about this tendency for borrowed nostalgia. You can be nostalgic for a time you didn't live through.
Yeah.
And the stat about 15% of Gen Zers will feel nostalgic for music from the 80s or before, which by definition they didn't live through.
Interesting.
And then of course, when we see Running Up That Hill go to number one, wasn't technically released as a single. It's just everyone going to streaming straight away because they think, yeah, this is great.
Yeah. And then that leads them down further rabbit holes of other 80s music. So like I mentioned in the intro, if I want to prod the bruise of nostalgia, I will go and look through my old Tumblr, which I would post on after school every day. And then I will specifically go to Spotify and listen to a playlist that is titled Tumblr 2013, because it will be all the different songs that I used to listen to back in the day, like, Lana Del Rey, old school, Arctic Monkeys, old school.
Did you make that, or is that just in
no?
the
That's
ether?
just in the ether.
Wow.
So I will search on Spotify Tumblr playlists, and it'll be like Tumblr 2013, Tumblr 2012, and like all the different subsects of the type of Tumblrs that you would have. There would be different. It's literally like a nostalgia core. Do you know what I mean? Time capsule. And so again, I would go and watch the kind of first season of Friends, because that is like the outfits, the kind of grainy fuzziness. Like I love all that, right? And I was max 5 years old when I would have been, I don't think I ever watched it as a kid. It was only as a nostalgic craving. And same with the original version of 90210,
right,
with like Brenda and Brandon. And me and my sister would like go shopping, and we'd specifically look for 90s style outfits that we'd be like, oh my God, that's so Brenda.
Yeah.
And we would then buy them because that was what we wanted from our nostalgia for a time that we'd never lived through.
That's probably something said, like media that it's romanticized from the inception, right? Even when it's contemporary, it's like it's portraying a life that like you're with your friends, like everything's kind of fun. It's like so it's kind of carrying that from the beginning.
Yeah, 100%.
Imagine how unaffordable it is for like 6 friends to live in New York with invariable like degrees of employment.
Maybe we're more cynical now. It's harder to do that with the media we're making at the moment.
And like, what are the chances that you get rooms that are like flats that are opposite each other, literally on the same floor in the same apartment? So bringing it back to the numbers, is anyone or any life stage more prone to nostalgia? We talked a little bit about kind of old and young people, but let's get a bit more kind of actionable and practical for brands. So you talked about the U-curve. Are there any kind of things that define nostalgia?
Well, I think what we see with the people who are more prone to it, if that's the best way to put it, about the attitude that you described, Matt, about preferring to look at the past rather than the future, as well as the age profile we mentioned. There's also something interesting that seems to intersect with health, mental and physical. So people who describe themselves as being prone to anxiety or anxious about their use of social media, they're more likely to report this feeling, which again maybe helps with that kind of self-care, self-soothe type strategy. And in terms of one of the more interesting questions we've asked about this is what people find, it's going to sound wrong in context, but like most triggering for nostalgia. They're most likely to bring on a feeling of nostalgia. And the biggest one is autobiographical memories, which makes sense, right? Because they're personal to you. They're going to be more powerful. Like you reflect on a situation that you were in. But media isn't far behind. Like it's actually pretty close as to like you listening to a song or watching a film versus like maybe you sort of remember friends you used to hang out with or something like that. Like, so it indicates like it's quite an even playing field in terms of what's specific to people versus what is served to them.
That surprises me. I would have said that media would be stronger than autobiographical.
Interesting.
Like I would have automatically said that songs or kind of TV shows would bring me way quicker to that feeling of nostalgia.
Do you think it's because they're maybe more accessible, like with on-demands, you know?
I think it's because it's the nostalgic for what I didn't have. Like an autobiographical memory is something that I have lived and breathed, whereas I never lived with 6 friends in New York, you know, and I think I want to. Film versus TV shows versus music, is there anything, so obviously it's second behind autobiographical, is there any media that specifically is most powerful in inciting that nostalgic feeling?
Globally, it seems to be film, which
Really?
I have to admit I found quite surprising. I
just think it would have been music.
Yeah, I assumed it would be music. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I guess films do have music as well as everything else, right? It's interesting you talk about the Great Depression, Matt, and how important cinema going was to the nostalgic function then. I wonder if there's something it's about, like maybe it's the cinema experience as well. Like you're going to a certain place, like maybe there's popcorn, like the sort of feeling of the seats. Maybe this is sort of waxing poetic again, but it's sort of, you know, maybe there's just more dimensions to it than music. What do you guys think?
I mean, do you think that means that we may be less nostalgic for films in the on-demand era, if that's not as much of an experience anymore?
As if that was your first viewing of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good point. I really don't know.
Because are you nostalgic for the cinema or are you nostalgic for the film?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see what I mean? Like it's the activity, it's the process of going out and you know having the sound and smell of popcorn and stuff. Maybe it's just multi-sensory.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
One thing that did surprise me is that photographs actually rank quite low in terms of triggering nostalgia, which again I find amazing because we just take so many photos now and we have so many of them, and if you have the same phone or same photos account for a long time, you've got like or social media accounts, right? You've got a pictorial archive going back a long way. So that's sort of me helps this idea of like maybe it's a kind of multi-dimension thing, like photos are just an image. Just the more there is, the more nostalgia comes along.
Going back to the 2016 year though, I think there's something really niche about kind of Instagram posts of that time. They all had the same purple hue filter. You know, that it was kind of like the year that everyone was trying to be like Kylie Jenner, and like it just felt like such a real zeitgeist moment.
2016 had the Snapchat dog filter.
The Snapchat dog filter, the kind of dark green lipstick, dark purple lipstick, like all these things that, like, I don't feel like we have trends that are as strong now. But obviously, I would say that because
in 9 years we'll be saying 2031 or
but what would it be? I can't think of. I don't know. We need to. We're maybe not as trendy anymore. I want to talk quickly a little bit about ads and kind of this idea of like marketing or advertising tapping into this nostalgic zeitgeist I mentioned at the start. Hellmann's, McDonald's, Kellogg's, they've all kind of tried to tap into this, and quite successfully as well. So do we have any data on like, do consumers want to see nostalgia in ads?
It's interesting. 1 in 10 consumers say that they feel nostalgic for ads. So I think that at some point you probably remember some kind of like memorable advert. Like in the UK, there's that like the one that marketing students love, which is the like Cadbury Gorilla one with the Phil Collins drums, and jingles. They're kind of doing exactly what they're meant to do, right? They're meant to find a little way into your brain and stay there. They're meant to be effective, but it's interesting people being nostalgic for something that was made to sell them something fundamentally.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Chris, one of the things that we talk about is kind of how trends change, and as humans we change. And talk to me about kind of the importance of people thinking back in the past versus future. Like, what's the?
Well, yeah, I think it's this interesting in the advertising context, right? I mean, part of the purpose of marketing is repetition, right? So there's brand assets, brand identity you carry forward for decades. But we so often talk about change, right, and what's coming in the future. But I think we sometimes overlook how much people live in the past, and how you can activate that is something I find fascinating. Like Matt, I know we talked about this before, but the Guinness craze, which I think we can use in the past tense now, but maybe it's still continuing. I don't know.
Oh, isn't everyone being obsessed with Guinness?
Yeah. For me, I think in our research, it seemed to peak last summer in the UK, but I find that very interesting because the Guinness pubs around me, like they often have the old ads, the old paraphernalia, like the toucan, those sort of old posters. I don't know if that's nostalgia or it's maybe retro, which is a sort of subtly different thing.
I think it's something around like legacy brands having that and heritage as well. You know,
Heritage,
something around that.
100%. What about purchases? So like the kind of nostalgic purchases. So for some reason, I don't know why, you guys seen all this Labubu stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So for some reason, they keep making me think of Furbies. Did you guys ever have a Furby?
I didn't have one. You did.
You had a Furby?
Well, I got two older sisters, so it was a big Furby household at the time.
I bet. And the Labubu it's giving Furby to me. Like it's making me and I'm like, okay, so
Beanie Baby as well.
Or Beanie Babies, and which is kind of reminiscent of currently everyone's obsessed with Jellycats.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe that's what we'll be nostalgic for in 10 years time. All of that. So what about like the kind of kidult purchases?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
You know, like Lego. I'm a Disney adult. Like I love Disney. But yeah, what are some of the kidult trends that we're seeing?
We've definitely seen a lot of trends amongst the younger consumers who are potentially a little bit more nostalgic, you know. Pokemon cards again, like third time bringing it up. And you're right, like the Labubu thing, they're more likely to purchase things such as plushies and kind of toys and things like that. Yeah, 100%. And I find that really interesting because it's kind of like I feel as though it's a generation that have potentially been kind of robbed of those kind of formative moments, you know.
Because of COVID?
Potentially because of COVID, you know, potentially because of, you know, the economic state of things, not being able to maybe move out or not being able to, you know. Yeah. So the lines between kind of childhood and adulthood become a little bit blurred. It means that you get this kidult bubble of like kids who are like, well, like I have a bit of income, maybe I've got a job, but I don't really feel like an adult. So yeah, let's get a couple of Labubus, you know. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Let's get a couple of Labubus. So I have a question for you guys that I want to end on, which we kind of teased at this kind of middle of the episode, but what do you think that we are going to be nostalgic for in 15 years time for 2025?
Should I go first, Matt?
I mean, you said it, to be fair. Maybe like we'll look at Labubus as we did like Beanie Babies, like you say, you know, remember those? Look, and I'm not writing them off. They could be, you know, emblematic of the culture. They could still stand the test of time and they could still be around in 10 years. Me personally, I'm betting not. So maybe we'll look back at that kind of trend in the same kind of way as we did those kind of like little collectibles in the 90s.
So can I go next?
Yeah, of course.
So I have a theory. I'm really nostalgic for Vines. Like I will watch loops.
Well, this is probably part of the 2016 story, isn't it?
Yeah, which we haven't actually touched on.
Yeah.
But Vines, I think, was such like a pivotal time in our lives, and I quote them to this day. And I'll watch YouTube loops of Vines just to keep my knowledge. To keep my knowledge topped up. But what that made me think of is, what else do I go onto YouTube to like reminisce from the past? Because YouTube is such a good like archive of all that once was in media and what is now. And do you guys remember, this might be a lost reference on you, Alexis Ren and Jay Alvarez traveling the world?
I'm sorry.
You need to spend some time watching that because it's like proper lore that you need to know about. So Alexis Ren is a famous model, and she was with this guy called Jay Alvarez, and they basically started what felt like the coolest Kygo-fueled travel style vlog.
Sure.
So it's like tropical house beats, and they're just like jumping out of planes, and they're like, you know, swimming in the ocean, and they're like so in love, and they're like eating like mango in the sea. And it's just so ingrained in my mind. And if I ever want to reminisce, I will go and watch those. So what I'm trying to say is, translating that into currently now, what would that version of that be? And I think it's TikToks for me.
Yeah.
It's the kind of TikTok story time, the kind of spend the day with me vlogs. that will make me that will kind of spark that nostalgia for me.
I agree. I think there's something to be said, like every platform media has a certain golden age near the start when it's new and people are inventing it and exploring it, and then it becomes kind of standardized, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just inevitable with these things. I think, yeah, for me personally, something I'm intrigued by is it's sort of similar thing, but it's sort of like, we haven't mentioned this in the whole episode, but like it's 2025, so we have to mention AI.
Yeah.
But the sense of the models and what they can do, especially in terms of generating media, improving so much that like the old ones become dated quite quickly. And I'm sort of tempted to think there's something in the kind of primitive versions before they became very good and very, very photorealistic, when the hands are quite funny and the faces weren't quite right, because it will be so evocative of a certain area. That's kind of my theory. So what's the album, Matt? It's the Lil Yachty one, where the cover is very much that old style of AI, which already seems dated now, because that was the best the tech could do at the time, I want to say.
It's crazy to think that, you know, that's already moved on so much over the last couple of years. But I've seen that sentiment as well, that, you know, people saying, oh, we should have stopped here.
I wonder if people are gonna, like, you know how I've seen like people recreating, like on TikTok, like turning on a big computer and lifting up the landline and hearing putting it down, and then logging onto Windows and like opening up music player, and you're getting the like you know, like the real noughties like computer experience. Anyway, whether it's old AI images or going back onto ChatGPT to see, or buying Labubus in 2025, 2020, 2030, hello, 2040. That's a wrap on nostalgia. If you want to get nostalgic, you can go back and watch episode 1 of this podcast. If you like what you saw, you can also subscribe to the newsletter where all of this came from, which is on the dot. Find it at tudorui.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell to get notified for new episodes. Thanks, guys. Bye.